My name is Officer Claire Reynolds, and the night I arrested my own father was the night I realized justice isn't just a word printed on the side of my badge. It's the sound of handcuffs echoing in a hospital room, the look of fear in my mother's eyes, and the moment I had to choose between blood and duty. That night began with a phone call that sliced through the silence of my tiny apartment. It was after midnight, and the voice on the line was shaking your mother's County General. "You need to come. It's bad." I don't remember locking the door or even driving across town. I only remember the taste of metal in my mouth, the burn of adrenaline in my chest. The kind of instinct that comes when you know something is terribly wrong. By the time I reached the hospital, the fluorescent lights painted everything in a sickly yellow. The scent of antiseptic stung my nose. I moved down the corridor, my boots echoing against the tiles. Every step was heavy, like the building itself was daring me to keep going. And then I heard his voice, harsh, venomous, carrying down the hall like a whip. "Be grateful I went easy on you." My father's words cut through the hallway, slicing into the sterile quiet of the hospital wing. I froze outside the room. My hand tightened on the doorknob. Inside, my mother lay pale and weak, an IV running into her arm. Her face was turned away, shrinking from him, the man she had loved for 30 years. She didn't look like my mother anymore. She looked like a shadow of the woman who had once sung me lullabies and pressed a lunch bag into my hands before school. He towered over her chest, heaving eyes dark with the same fire I'd known since childhood. My father, Thomas Reynolds, was a man of pride and temper, a man who believed respect was taken, not earned. And in that moment, he was no father at all, just another abuser standing over his victim. My breath slowed. Training kicked in. Situational awareness. Assess threats. Protect the vulnerable. I had done this 100 times before, but never here, never with him. The room was so silent I could hear the faint beep of the IV machine, steady and fragile. My mother's hand twitched against the sheets like she wanted to reach out but couldn't. I pushed the door open, the hinges, groaning, and stepped inside. "Dad," I said. My voice was calm, steady, but every muscle in me was coiled like a spring. "Step away from her." He spun around, surprise flickering across his face when he saw the uniform. Not just his daughter anymore, a police officer. "What is this?" he barked. "You think you can walk in here and—" "This ends tonight." I moved further into the room, my eyes never leaving his. "Step back now." For a moment he laughed. Actually, laughed. The sound was bitter, mocking. "You're going to tell me what to do? In my house, in my family? Don't forget who raised you, girl." "I haven't forgotten," I said, my hand brushing the handcuffs at my belt. "I remember everything." Memories surged behind my eyes. The slammed doors, the shouted insults, the way Mom used to cover bruises with long sleeves even in July. The nights I'd hidden in my room, praying he wouldn't come storming in. And now, here he was, the same man. But this time, I wasn't a frightened little girl. I was sworn to uphold the law. He took a step toward me, jaw clenched. "This is family business." I didn't move. Not anymore. The words hung in the air like a verdict. My mother whispered, barely audible, "Claire, please." Her voice cracked, caught between terror and hope. I didn't look away from him. Couldn't. "You're done hurting her. You're done hurting anyone." He sneered, his pride bleeding through every line of his face, but I saw it, the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the realization that this time he wasn't in control. My hand closed around the cold steel of the cuffs. The metallic click echoed in the room, final and unyielding. It wasn't just the sound of restraint. It was the sound of 30 years of silence breaking. And for the first time in my life, my father had no words. I grew up in a house where the floorboards knew my father's temper, and the walls learned to hold their breath. By day, he was neighborly, waving from the porch, brushing sawdust off his jeans. Nights peeled the paint. That's when the bottle came out, or the questions started. Who called? Where were you? Why are you dressed like that? And a storm rolled in over the kitchen table. My mother's name is Evelyn. She smiled with one corner of her mouth the way people do when showing all their joy feels unsafe. She lined thrift store teacups on the kitchen window and called them her little choir. When I was 8, one shattered on the tile. He hadn't thrown it, he said. He'd bumped the shelf too hard. She nodded, because nodding kept the night moving. We learned a choreography. The phone book drawer braced a fall. A quilt stayed on the couch to hide a stain that never washed out. Mom wore cardigans in July and told church ladies she ran cold. He loved God loudly on Sundays and control quietly the rest of the week. Your mother needs structure, he'd say. Performing for an invisible jury. That's a husband's job. When I was 13, he got jealous of the mailman because Mom laughed at a coupon. That evening, a storm knocked out power. I lay in bed counting seconds between thunder and the thud of his boots. There were good days. Pancake Saturdays. Patsy Cline on the radio, Mom singing off-key to make me giggle. Good days are how bad years keep going. They bait hope. I kept my shoes by the bed and my backpack packed. At school, I loved places where rules meant safety, the library where quiet was law, the gym where lines told you where to stand and a whistle could stop chaos. By sophomore year, I read restraining order case studies like other girls read romances. I didn't admit I was rehearsing. At 16, I tried to intervene. He accused Mom of flirting with a hardware clerk, a 60-year-old in suspenders. Dad, that's ridiculous, I said. The room snapped toward me. He didn't hit me. He hit the doorframe so close, the gust brushed my cheek. That night, Mom said I was brave. In the morning, she apologized for letting things get out of hand. We both knew whose hands. I left for the police academy 2 weeks after graduation. I told him the morning I drove away duffel at my feet coffee ring on my acceptance letter. He exhaled through his nose. So you'll be one of those girls, he said, walking around like you're better than everyone. Mom hugged me and pressed a small silver cross into my palm. For your locker, she whispered. He watched from the porch jaw, working like a machine chewing a nail. Training taught me boundaries, scene, safety command, voice, listening, with your eyes. My body learned to plant my feet, breathe through adrenaline, keep my tone level while the world tilted. What the academy couldn't teach was how to carry a mother's lowered gaze. I came home less. When I did, I timed visits to his schedule. We made small talk and pretended the house wasn't a museum of slammed doors. I watched Mom set the table with careful kindness and wondered how much of her life had been spent preventing instead of living. The jealousy sharpened with age. He inspected her phone, called her at work every hour, then accused her of dodging him when she missed one because a patient coded. A church friend named May started driving Mom home. When he found out, he parked outside May's house. He's rattling his own cage, May told me. A rattled man gets loud. I brought Mom brochures, safety plans, hotline numbers, bold, do you feel safe at home? She traced the edges as if the pages might cut. If I make it official, she said he'll make it a war. I knew that calculus. Tyrants win 100 surrenders before they ever claim a final victory. I changed her phone settings, taught her to breathe through panic on the back steps, made her memorize my work number. When I spoke to Dad, I used my training voice, steady offering an exit ramp. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes the air went metallic again. There's a smell when fear lives too long in a room, old pennies and lemon cleaner, and the ghost of something burned. You notice it when you've been gone a while. That's how the hospital wings smelled the night I walked in home in emergency. He always said he hated men who hit women. He never named it when his fingers closed too hard around Mom's wrist or when a glass shattered because his palm struck the table. He had a vocabulary that excused him, accidents, misunderstandings, stress. Mom learned to translate him. He's tired. He's under pressure. He had a word for everything except accountability. People ask why she stayed. Staying is 1,000 small decisions. Leaving is a mountain money, where to go, what happens when a man who hates losing realizes he's losing you. She stayed because we didn't have much. She stayed because enduring a blow can feel safer than provoking a war. She stayed because she loved the man from Pancake Saturdays and believed the rest might pass. By the time I pinned my badge, I knew the statutes and the map of my father's anger, where it rose, where it broke, where it pretended to be a wave and turned out to be a riptide. So when the phone call came, I already knew how the hallway would smell and how my mother would turn her face away like the sun had become an eclipse. Outside her door, his sentence cracked the air. Be grateful I went easy on you, and the years telescoped into a second. I became every version of myself at once. The girl holding her breath, the cadet breathing through fear, the officer with steel at her hip. When I told him to move, I wasn't bringing the law to a stranger. I was bringing it home. And when the cuffs clicked, they didn't erase our history. They drew a line under it enough. My name didn't always sound right next to the word officer. For years, I carried my father's last name like a bruise. Reynolds meant rage. Reynolds meant silence. But the academy gave me a new vocabulary: duty, honor, service. Those words fit me better than anything he ever offered. The transformation didn't happen overnight. The first month at the academy, I woke before dawn to lace stiff boots that rubbed blisters into my heels. I ran until my lungs tasted like iron and my legs threatened to fold. Drill instructors barked until spit sprayed the air. You think criminals care about your feelings? Plant your feet, Reynolds. Own the ground you stand on. I learned to square my shoulders when fear wanted to hunch them. I learned that a steady voice can disarm a room more than a drawn weapon. And slowly, I realized I was rewriting the story I'd lived through. No longer the girl shrinking from her father's shadow, but a woman stepping into the light of her own command. Nights at the academy were the hardest. Lying in a dorm with 30 other cadets, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, my mind wandered back home. I saw Mom hunched at the kitchen sink washing dishes that never stayed clean, her smile thinner each year. I heard Dad's footsteps pounding the hallway, the slam of a fist against wood. Sometimes I thought, what if this training is useless if I can't protect the person who needs me most? That thought burned hotter than any obstacle course. Graduation day felt unreal. Mom sat in the bleachers, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles whitened. Dad wasn't there. He told her I was parading like some wannabe soldier. But when they pinned the badge onto my chest, I felt an armor stronger than steel. I wasn't just Claire anymore. I was Officer Reynolds, sworn to serve and protect. The first months on the job, I saw echoes of my childhood everywhere. Calls about domestic disputes that were really battles fought in whispers and bruises. Women who opened the door with a trembling smile and said, "It's nothing, officer," while their eyes screamed for help. Children who flinched when I shifted my flashlight beam. Every scene was a mirror, and every time I left, I carried their silence like extra weight in my vest. One night, a boy about 10 clutched my sleeve after we arrested his stepfather. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Are you going to bring him back?" I knelt so our eyes met and said the words I wish someone had told me at that age. "No, not tonight. You're safe." That boy didn't know it, but he gave me back a piece of myself. Because every victim I helped, every family I stood between, in danger, I wasn't just enforcing law. I was rewriting the ending I never got as a child. I was proving to myself that cycles can break. But the uniform didn't erase the past. At home, Dad still simmered. Pride and control were his twin addictions. He'd sneer when Mom mentioned my work. "So now you think you're better than your old man." I learned not to bite back. Silence often diffused more than words. Still, every jab hit the old bruise. Then came the night I responded to a call 2 streets from my childhood home. A woman was screaming. Her husband had locked her out. By the time I arrived, neighbors were crowding the sidewalk. I guided her inside, speaking calm, measured words. When her husband lunged, I ordered him down, and he actually obeyed. Later, as the woman whispered thank you, I caught sight of the cross around her neck, the same as Mom's. My hands shook as I signed the report. It felt like I had stepped into my own past and chosen differently this time. That moment hardened my resolve. No matter what it cost, I would not allow fear to rule my mother's life anymore. I was no longer just her daughter, I was her protector, sworn both by blood and by badge. And yet, Beneath the resolve, a current of dread ran steady. What would I do if the day came when duty demanded I confront my father? Would I hesitate? Would the little girl inside me tremble too much to act? That night in the hospital answered the question, when his voice struck the air like a hammer. Be grateful I went easy on you and I opened that door. I didn't feel like a child anymore. I felt every mile of the academy's runs in my lungs, every order barked into my bones, every bruise on my heels that hardened into callus. I felt the oath I swore weighty and true. And when my hand touched the cuffs at my belt, I knew this was why I had become a cop. Not for the streets, not for strangers, but for the woman who taught me kindness in a house full of storms. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was Justice, walking into a room my father thought he still controlled. The room smelled of rubbing alcohol and stale sweat, the kind of hospital scent that clings to your clothes long after you leave. My father stood near the bed, shoulders squared like a man who thought he still owned the space around him. Mom's eyes flicked to me, wide wet, pleading without words. I stepped farther in the door, clicking shut behind me. The sound was final, like a gavel. Step away from her, I said again, each syllable measured. He stared at me, no through me, like I was still the girl who used to fetch his beer from the fridge. This is family business, he growled. My boots planted firm on the linoleum. Not anymore. His laugh was short and sharp. You think that uniform makes you somebody. You think a badge changes the fact that I'm your father. It doesn't change that, I answered, voice steady. But it changes what happens next. The heart monitor ticked in the silence. Beep, beep, each one louder than the last. My mother shifted slightly on the bed, flinching at every word. He took a step closer, his shadow falling across my face. For a split second, I saw the man from my childhood, the same square jaw, the same burning eyes. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The old fear whispered, "Don't challenge him, don't provoke him." But my hand brushed the cuffs at my belt, and the whisper was drowned out by something stronger. Protect her. You're making a mistake, he said, low and venomous. This family stays together. We handle things our way. Our way, I snapped, my tone cutting sharper than I intended. Your way is yelling until the neighbors shut their windows. Your way is bruises covered by cardigans. Your way is control. That ends tonight. His jaw worked, grinding molars like stones. You'd lock up your own father. If he's breaking the law, yes, I said. The words were a stone I had carried for years, finally dropped. For the first time, his eyes faltered. He saw it in me, the resolve, the training, the badge that wasn't just cloth and metal, but a promise. Mom's voice wavered from the bed. Claire, please, just... She trailed off, trapped between fear of him and fear of what would happen next. I turned my head slightly, just enough so she'd know she was seen. Mom, you're safe. That was when he lunged, not with fists, but with presence, stepping into my space chest, puffed, trying to make me small again. You don't get to decide what safe is in my family. My hand shot up between us, palm firm. Enough! The word cracked through the room like a whip. He froze, startled, not because I was louder, but because I didn't flinch. For the first time, I wasn't retreating. This isn't about family pride. It's about assault. It's about 30 years of fear, and it's over. His nostrils flared. His pride fought for air, but the room was suffocating him now. He glanced at Mom, then back at me. He searched for the little girl who used to obey, who used to tiptoe around his anger. She wasn't there. I pulled the cuffs free. The metallic snap echoed against the walls, bouncing off tile and glass. My hand was steady, though my chest shook inside. Turn around, I ordered. For a long second, he didn't move. His eyes narrowed, his jaw twitched, but the authority in my voice left him nowhere to go. Slowly, like gravity itself forced him, he turned. I took his wrists, rough skin, under my fingers and locked the steel around them. The click rang out sharp and final. The sound wasn't just cuffs closing. It was history breaking. He stiffened his breath quick and shallow. You'll regret this, he muttered. No, I said quietly. I'll regret if I don't. Behind me, Mom let out a sob that wasn't fear this time. It was release. The heart monitor kept its steady rhythm. Beep, beep. Life pulsing on even as something else in that room finally ended. The sound of the cuffs still hung in the air as if the walls themselves couldn't believe what had happened. My father, Thomas Reynolds, the man who never bowed, never admitted fault, stood with his wrists shackled in front of the very woman he had sworn to protect, but spent decades breaking down. I steadied my breathing. Training said de-escalate, control the scene. But this wasn't just a scene. This was my family cracked open in fluorescent light. Mom sat propped against the pillows, one hand pressed to her chest, as though she needed to hold her heart inside. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, as if years of fear had shrunk her frame until only her spirit held her upright. I moved closer. Mom, I whispered, it's okay. You're safe now. But was she? I could hear the doubt in my own voice. Safety wasn't permanent. Safety was fragile, especially when it came to a man like him. Dad twisted his head back toward me. You think this makes you strong? Putting your own blood in chains. His voice was lower now, tight, each word forced through clenched teeth. I kept my tone level. This isn't about blood. This is about law. You broke it the moment you laid a hand on her. His lips curled. You've been poisoned. The academy filled your head with lies. Family is handled at home. My hand flexed against my belt. Family isn't supposed to be handled. It's supposed to be loved. He scoffed, shaking his head. Pride leaked from him like oil from a cracked engine. She's always been weak. Always needed me to... Stop! The word cut sharper than the steel on his wrists. She's strong for surviving you this long. The room fell into a silence so loud it pressed against my eardrums. Mom's voice broke it soft as paper tearing. Claire. Her eyes were glassy, filled with both gratitude and fear. Don't hate him. He's your father. I swallowed hard. The words scraped like gravel going down. I don't hate him, Mom. But love doesn't excuse abuse. A knock came at the door. Officer Daniels, my partner on shift, stepped in. His eyes flicked between me, Dad in cuffs, and Mom in the bed. He raised his brows but said nothing. He'd seen plenty of ugly scenes, but this one needed no explanation. You need a transport, he asked quietly. I nodded. My throat was tight. Dad stiffened. You'll parade me out like some criminal in front of strangers. Daniels met his glare with calm professionalism. Because you are under arrest, sir? Dad jerked against the cuffs, the clinking sound metallic and raw. You can't do this. She's my wife. She belongs to me. The words snapped through me like a whip. Belongs. As if my mother were furniture, not flesh. I stepped closer, looking him square in the eye. She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to herself. And tonight she finally gets to breathe without you crushing the air from her lungs. For the first time, his bravado faltered. Just for a second, but enough for me to see the crack in his armor. Daniels took his arm steady but firm. Let's go. Dad resisted, muttering curses, but the steel held. The echo of their footsteps faded down the hallway until only the IV beep and Mom's shallow breaths remained. I turned back. She was crying silently, tears trailing into her hairline. I sat on the edge of the bed, taking her frail hand in mine. You did it, she whispered, voice raspy. You really did it. No, Mom, I said softly. You did. You survived long enough for me to get here. She shook her head weakly. But he's still your father. I'm afraid I ruined that for you. I pressed her hand against my chest over the badge. You didn't ruin anything. He made his choices, and I made mine. Her eyelids fluttered shut, exhaustion pulling her under, but her grip on my fingers stayed light but insistent. I sat there, watching the rise and fall of her chest, wondering if justice had cost me more than I realized. Because as satisfying as the cuffs had sounded, as righteous as the arrest had been, The hollow ache in my chest whispered of something lost. Blood ties don't vanish with one click of steel. They fray, they bleed, they haunt. And as much as I wanted to believe this was the end, a darker truth pressed at the edge of my thoughts. This was only the beginning of consequences none of us could yet see. The jail smelled of bleach and old stone, a place where time moved in slow drips from leaking pipes. I had walked those halls dozens of times before guiding strangers to holding cells, filing reports under buzzing fluorescent lights. But walking in to see my father behind bars felt like stepping into a dream I never wanted. He sat at the metal table, wrists free, now, but posture rigid. The cuffs had left faint red marks on his skin. His pride was still intact, but it sagged in the slump of his shoulders. When the door clanged open and Mom entered thin frame hospital bracelet still dangling from her wrist, the room shifted. I stayed by the doorway, hands folded, badge heavy on my chest. She paused just inside, steadying herself on the chair. Her face was pale, but her eyes carried something I didn't expect. Not rage, not revenge, something quieter, heavier. He looked up, and for a moment, he wasn't the man who towered in the doorway of my childhood room. He was just a tired man in a gray jumpsuit, his voice low, hoarse. "You came." Mom nodded. Her hand shook as she set her purse on the table. "Yes, I came." The silence stretched a taut rope between them. "I suppose you're here to gloat?" he muttered, looking anywhere but at her. "To see me brought low. Is that what you wanted?" Her voice was soft but steady. "No, Thomas. I came to tell you I forgive you." The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Even the guard outside shifted, glancing through the glass. My breath caught. Forgive after everything. His head snapped up. "Forgive? After all this, after you put me here?" "I didn't put you here," she said gently. "You put yourself here." Her hands folded on the table, fingers laced tight as though she was holding herself together. "You spent so many years thinking control was love, thinking fear was respect. But it wasn't. It broke us. It broke me." He shifted, jaw clenched. Pride fought to keep its throne, but cracks showed. His eyes darted toward me, then back to her. "You don't understand," he said, quieter now. "I did it to keep you safe, to keep us together." "Safe!" She leaned forward, and for the first time in years, her voice carried strength. "Safe isn't bruises under sleeves. Safe isn't looking over my shoulder every time you raise your hand. Safe is love without fear." He faltered, words dying in his throat. The silence swelled again, heavy and hot. Then she did something that stunned me more than the forgiveness itself. She reached across the cold metal table and laid her trembling hand over his. "I forgive you," she said again. "Not because you deserve it, but because I can't carry this anger anymore. It's too heavy, and I don't want to die with it in my heart." His chest rose sharply, like the words pierced his armor. He stared at their joined hands, his lips pressed tight, trembling. For the first time, his eyes glossed with something that looked like shame. His voice cracked dry and uncertain. "I don't know how to come back from this." Mom squeezed his hand, her fragile fingers against his rough skin. "Start by admitting you were wrong. Then start by listening instead of shouting. You can't undo what you've done, Thomas, but you can stop letting your pride own you." The room held its breath. I felt the sting of tears at the corners of my eyes. For years, I had dreamed of this moment of him broken, of her free. But I never imagined it would come with her offering him a lifeline. He pulled his hand back, slowly covering his face. His shoulders shook once, twice. A choked sound escaped his throat, half sob, half growl. I looked away, not to give him dignity, but because the image unsettled me. My father crying was as foreign as snow in July. When the guard announced time was up, Mom stood carefully. She touched his arm one last time. "I forgive you, but you must decide what you'll do with that forgiveness. Don't waste it." As we walked out, her steps were slow, but there was a lightness in her shoulders I hadn't seen since I was a child. She had chosen release, and in that choice, she had found power. I, on the other hand, felt the weight shift onto me, because forgiveness didn't erase what had happened. It only forced the question. Could he change, or would this be another mask he wore until anger found him again? Still, for the first time, I saw a crack in his pride. And sometimes cracks are where the light slips in. Weeks passed, like slow rivers winding through stone. Mom recovered steadily. Her cheeks flushed pink again. Her voice grew stronger. Every time I visited, she asked the same question. Have you heard anything about your father? And every time I told her the truth, I didn't know what would come of him. Court dates shifted. Lawyers whispered, judges deliberated. But what stuck with me was that moment in the holding room when she placed her fragile hand over his and spoke the word I never thought I'd hear: forgiveness. I carried it with me like a riddle. In uniform, I saw men who swore they'd change but never did. I saw women give chance after chance until the cycle dragged them under again. Forgiveness was dangerous. It could be an open door or a revolving trap. And yet, it was hers to give. One evening, just after sunset, I sat with her on the porch of her small rented apartment. The air smelled of honeysuckle and cut grass. Fireflies flickered over the yard. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders even though the night was warm. He wrote me a letter, she said, her eyes fixed on the horizon. I turned. Dad. She nodded. Said he's ashamed. Said he can't stop thinking about the look on your face that night. He wants to try counseling. He says he wants to be different. I stayed quiet. My gut twisted with skepticism. A lifetime of patterns doesn't shift because of one night in handcuffs. But then I looked at her. The lines around her eyes softer, her breathing calmer, and I realized this wasn't about whether I believed him. It was about whether she had the strength to believe in something again. You don't have to let him back in, I said carefully. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean going back. She smiled faintly, sad but certain. I know, but forgiveness means I'm not chained to the past anymore. What he does with it, that's on him. For the first time I understood. Her forgiveness wasn't a gift for him. It was freedom for herself. Months later, when his case was finally heard, I watched from the back of the courtroom. Dad stood at the defense table, older somehow. His posture bent, his eyes less sharp. When asked if he had anything to say, he cleared his throat and admitted to the charges. No excuses, no denials. Just 3 words I had never heard him say in my entire life: I was wrong. It didn't erase the past. It didn't wipe away the bruises, the fear, the years of silence. But it was a beginning. After the sentencing, he caught my eye across the room. His lips trembled as though he wanted to speak, but didn't dare. For once, he didn't command the space. He simply nodded, a small, tentative gesture of surrender. I didn't nod back. Not then. But as I walked Mom out into the crisp autumn air, I realized something: justice and forgiveness aren't enemies. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Justice stops the harm. Forgiveness begins the healing. That night, sitting beside Mom at her kitchen table, I removed my badge and set it down. Its weight left a faint imprint on the wood. You saved me, she whispered. I shook my head. No, Mom. You saved yourself. You forgave. That's harder than anything I've ever done. She reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. We both saved something. We saved the future. I thought of the girl I once was, the one who hid in her room, who prayed for quiet. And I thought of the woman I had become, standing tall, in uniform, voice, steady hand, firm on the cuffs. But most of all, I thought of my mother, fragile, yet unbroken, teaching me that true strength sometimes means laying down anger, not carrying it. So here's what I've learned. Justice puts an end to what destroys us. Forgiveness keeps us from being destroyed by what we can't change. My mother's courage to forgive didn't excuse my father's sins. It revealed a path where bitterness could have been the only legacy. To anyone listening, I'll say this. If you've carried fear or anger or hurt too heavy for too long, remember you have the power to put it down. Sometimes justice clicks like steel. Sometimes forgiveness whispers like mercy. Both can set you free. And if this story stirred something in you, share it. Reflect on it. Let it remind you that even in the darkest rooms, healing can begin with one choice, one word, one act of courage.